Merci d'être là si nombreux. Merci beaucoup à la librairie Maupetit d'accueillir cette rencontre assez exceptionnelle. On va donc évoquer le 13e roman de Salman Rushdie, La Maison Golden, dont la traduction française par Gérard Nodal donc vient de paraître. Au milieu de ces 13 romans, il y a une autobiographie qui s'intitule Joseph Anton, qui est parue en 2012, dans laquelle Salman Rushdie raconte la vie qui a été la sienne après la publication des versets sataniques. Du coup, cette autobiographie fait 650 pages, donc j'ai décidé de ne pas revenir sur ce sujet pendant l'entretien, puisque toutes les réponses que vous vous posez sûrement s'y trouvent. Voilà. Et le roman La Maison Golden est extrêmement riche, donc je pense que sa matière suffira largement à cette rencontre. Comme il vient de sortir, j'imagine que nombre d'entre vous ne l'ont pas encore lu, donc je vais en résumer l'intrigue. L'histoire commence à New York, le jour de l'investiture de Barack Obama pour son 2e mandat. Et ce jour-là, un homme, un millionnaire, qui se fait appeler Néron Golden, débarque d'un pays qu'il ne faut pas nommer, d'une ville qu'il ne faut pas nommer, et s'installe donc dans les jardins à New York, au cœur de Greenwich Village. Il n'est accompagné d'aucune femme, par contre il est accompagné de ses 3 fils. Ses 3 fils à qui il a demandé de changer de nom. Ils vont donc aller chercher leur nom dans la mythologie, notamment dans la littérature. Il y a d'abord Petronius, surnommé Pétia, un garçon à la triste et flamboyante étrangeté. Il y a Lucius Apuleius, dit Apu, un artiste qui est passionné de mystique et qui se sent très à l'aise dans la ville de New York. Et puis il y a Dionysos, qui a une autre mère que ses frères, qui est un être assez torturé et qui se pose notamment beaucoup de questions sur son identité sexuelle. Et parmi les voisins des Golden, il y a un jeune cinéaste qui s'appelle René et qui est donc le narrateur de cette histoire. Il va découvrir cette famille et va très vite se dire que c'est une mine romanesque pour son prochain film. Donc il va les rencontrer, il va les fréquenter. Et il va, en faisant cela, prendre de nombreux risques, puisqu'on ne s'appelle pas Néron par hasard, vous l'imaginez bien. Alors je commence, Salman Rushdie, avec ma première question. Dans ce livre, vous mettez en place un cadre géographique et un cadre temporel très précis. On a la maison Golden, les jardins qui forment comme un huis clos, au cœur d'une ville qui, elle, est remplie de mouvements. Et le roman se situe à un moment de basculement politique, puisqu'on est en pleine campagne présidentielle. Donc on a quelque chose de fixe au niveau spatial et de très mouvant, très incertain, très instable au niveau temporel. Est-ce que ces deux choix vous ont permis de lancer le roman à partir de ces deux décisions précises?
Yeah,
oui, absolument.
the question of place is always very important to me.
Toujours très important à lui.
And when you put a house in the title of a novel, the house will always fall. So there is a catastrophe looming just from the title. And what I thought about this private garden that really exists and is in the middle of Greenwich Village is that it became for me like a little theatre on which the characters, could perform their drama. Little private theatre, watched by all the people in the houses all around, and that outside this private theatre there would be the one could say the public theatre of New York in particular and America in general. So that was the starting point. That was the starting point. Once I knew the place and the time, that's what I need to know before I can start work. But in the finished novel, the time is very precise. That's to say, the novel begins on the day of the inauguration of Barack Obama, and it ends in the middle of the present insanity.
Et ça a fini dans le moment du moment fou qu'on vit actuellement aux États-Unis.
But that wasn't my original idea. You know, originally, I had not thought to begin and end it like that. I just wanted to make a portrait of what's going on in New York, roughly speaking, in the last decade. And I didn't have more precise dates than that. But when the phenomenon that we have to call Donald Trump began, then I thought I have to somehow incorporate this. And then I had the idea that you would begin at this moment of great optimism, this moment of hope, you know, and you would end in something like the opposite of that moment. But I should say that you know, this is not a novel about politics particularly. It's not even. It's certainly not a novel about Donald Trump. It's a marginal aspect of the novel. It's in the edges of the novel, not at the heart of it.
Ce que j'ai trouvé intéressant, c'est que René, donc ce jeune cinéaste, finalement, ce qui lui est caché l'intéresse tout autant que ce qui lui est montré par la famille Golden. C'est-à-dire que son imagination se déclenche aussi parce qu'il ne comprend pas très bien ce qu'il voit. Il y a une scène notamment de dispute entre Néron et Pétia, et il ne voit que les ombres chinoises des deux personnages. Je vais citer le livre, comme ça on peut aussi un peu entendre cette langue. Pétia, à un moment, explique justement à ce sujet à René. Il lui dit « En ce qui concerne ma famille », déclara-t-il un jour sans raison particulière, selon son habitude, sa conversation était une série de bombes qui tombaient au hasard issues du ciel bleu de sa pensée. Considérez la folie incessante qui régnait au palais à l'époque des 12 Césars. L'inceste, le matricide, les empoisonnements, l'épilepsie, les cadavres de bébés, la puanteur du mal, sans parler du cheval de Caligula. Quelle pagaille, mon garçon! Mais lorsque l'homme de la rue, à Rome, levait les yeux vers le palais, que voyait-il? Il marquait alors une pause espiègle pour ménager ses effets. Puis, il voyait le palais, mon garçon. Il voyait le fichu palais immuable, inchangé, présent. Donc là, il y a toute la puissance aussi de l'imagination chez René. C'est-à-dire qu'il entre dans cette maison avant d'y entrer.
First of all, one of the things that passage you read reveals is that this family is not a very modest family. You know, they compare themselves to the emperors of Rome.
Ils se comparent aux empereurs de Rome.
And they think of themselves as kings and princes.
Ils se voient comme des rois et des reines.
Which of course only makes their fall harder. Because a part of the reason for everything that happens to them, which I won't tell you, has to do with their arrogance. You know, they have crossed the world from you quickly understand that it is from India, and they have changed their names and they reject their past, and they have the confidence of their power and wealth that they can do whatever they like. They can make the world whatever they want to make it, you know. I think the reader understands quite early that this arrogance is misplaced, you know, that actually they are not going to be able to escape the past they're trying to escape. And gradually, over the course of 400 pages, the past comes and gets them, which is something like the structure of classical tragedy, you know, where there is a sort of inevitability. And the thing about the inevitability is that everybody can see it except the people concerned. So that's I can't tell you more than this without spoiling the story.
Par rapport à ce pays qui les ont quittés, l'Inde, ce que j'ai trouvé aussi intéressant, c'est que donc Néron veut absolument que ses fils s'intègrent à New York, aux États-Unis, etc. Et voilà, ce passé, ils veulent le laisser derrière eux. Seulement le passé, il ressurgit quand même à certains moments de l'histoire, et il est très très important finalement. C'est ce qui va causer aussi la perte de Néron et de ses enfants. Et notamment, l'Inde surgit par la langue. C'est-à-dire qu'au moment où Néron veut parler à ses fils de ce passé, ils ne parlent plus en anglais, ils parlent dans leur langue natale. Donc la langue est comme un ultime refuge, une ultime cache pour eux.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, I think that's true. India, you know, I have never managed to write a novel in which India was not important. In this novel, all the keys to the novel are all in the past in India, because the novel is a kind of mystery. You don't know why they are doing this. Why have they crossed the world? Why have they changed their identities? Why is it so important for them to erase the past? The thing about a mystery novel is you have to write it backwards, because I know why. But I'm not going to tell you. And even sometimes I will mislead you. So it feels a little like being, you know, Agatha Christie. And René, by the way, like Hercule Poirot, is of Belgian origin. I mean, he's not really Belgian. His parents were Belgian. He's actually the only person in the novel, of the major characters. He's the only one who is born and bred in America. He's a real American person. Most of the other major characters are immigrants. They've come, well, like the main family has come from India, but several of the other neighbors, one of them has come from Burma, Myanmar. Some others have come from Italy. And so it's a neighborhood of foreigners being watched by the one real American. I became very fond of René. I began to, by the time I finished the book, I thought it was really, in a way, the novel's about him. Or at least it's as much about him as it is about Nero Golden and his children. If you think about The Great Gatsby, none of the major characters, I mean, the novel takes place in New York and nearby in Long Island. Not a single one of the characters comes from there. They all come from the Midwest. They all come to New York in order to become themselves, and then they get screwed up. But that idea of arriving in order to become who you can be, you know, is very much at the center of a lot of American literature. And this is also a novel about arrival. It's a novel about people coming from somewhere else and becoming who they decide to be, who they choose to be. But I had an idea, another additional idea to this, which actually comes from Greek tragedy. In the ancient times, a lot of the performances of the great tragic plays were acted out by actors wearing masks. You know, they were masked plays, and you know the use of a false identity is also a way of putting on a mask. But the interesting idea that the Greeks had is that the mask does not conceal you, the mask reveals you. That somehow by wearing the mask you become who you really are. So I also have that sense of the book, that it's a book about people who put on masks thinking that by putting on the masks they are concealing themselves, whereas actually they are revealing themselves. For instance, these names that they choose for themselves. You know, these very magnificent names from antiquity. I had the idea that the names that they choose in a way predict their destiny, which again becomes, I think, pretty clear to everybody except them.
Alors j'avais envie de vous poser aussi une question plus technique sur l'écriture de ce livre. Il fait à peu près 400 pages et vous verrez, le rythme est très alerte, quoi. C'est un roman qui avance très bien, et je voulais savoir comment on donne de la vitesse à un roman aussi grand.
Well, I think there's two things to say about that. One is that the novel concerns itself, we haven't mentioned this yet, but we should, that the novel is very obsessed with movies. Because, you know, the character of René is somebody, he is obsessed with movies, and he's trying to start out in his life as a filmmaker. I've spent my life obsessed with movies.
Moi, j'ai passé ma vie obsédé par les films.
If you were born and brought up in Bombay, Bombay is a city that's insane about the cinema. If you buy a newspaper in Bombay, the outside 4 pages are news. And inside there are 24 pages of movie gossip. That's what everybody wants. So if you grow up there, then the movies are in your blood. And then when I was René's age, I was lucky that this was a kind of golden age of the cinema. And so I, devoured the films of the French Nouvelle Vague and the Italian New Wave and everybody else, Luis Buñuel, Ingmar Bergman, all these people. And I thought I would just give René all of my movie obsession, which is slightly unrealistic. Because young American filmmakers like René now, they're not thinking about European cinema. And they think about American filmmakers. You ask them who are the filmmakers that influence them, they will say Quentin Tarantino, Martin Scorsese, like that. So I just decided that I would allow him to have a more international, more kind of world cinema outlook. So he thinks about European film. He thinks at one point he decides he is going to be like Krzysztof Kieślowski. And, he's never made a movie. But he's already saying his movies will be better than Kieślowski. So the fact that the book is so interested in film also affects the way the book is written. It's written, one might say, cinematically. If you look at the book, you will see that a lot of the chapters are relatively brief chapters. Kind of like scenes in a movie. Except there's one chapter later in the book that is quite long, which is the chapter in which you finally find out all the secrets. And there are even 1 or 2 moments when the writing really slips into the style of scenario, of screenplay. So that whole interest in film is one of the ways in which the book achieves this, what you were saying, this kind of speed.
Je me demandais si vous arrivez, face à l'actualité, de trouver un peu refuge dans la lecture, c'est-à-dire dans des livres que vous lisez et qui provoquent chez vous une sensation de vous dire finalement, finalement la littérature nous a déjà dit ça, nous a déjà dit ce qui est en train de se passer.
I'm not sure about that. What I do know is this, that to write a book about the exact moment when the book is being written, it's dangerous.
C'est dangereux.
And in fact, many teachers of literature would tell you not to do it, because they would say you must wait till you have some distance and some perspective and some objectivity. Otherwise, you can't do it. I have a dislike of being told not to do things. So I thought, no, I'm going to try to do that. But it is dangerous, because if you do it badly, then your book almost immediately becomes irrelevant, like yesterday's newspapers. But if you do it properly, then if you're lucky, you manage to capture a moment. And that the moment is then captured for all time. And I reassured myself by reading some great novels which I felt had successfully done this. I mean, Scott Fitzgerald is one example. He's somebody who, when The Great Gatsby was published, there were some critics which said, this is just contemporary gossip, transient gossip, and it will not last. And now it's recognized as the great American novel. I read Fitzgerald. I also read great novel, The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, and more contemporary books like, Tom Wolfe's Bonfire of the Vanities.
Aussi des livres plus contemporains comme Bonfire de la Vanity de Tom Wolfe.
Which tries to capture a period in the 1980s.
Ce qui essaie de rattraper une période dans les années 80.
And a little older than that, James Baldwin's novel, Another Country.
Et plus vieux que ça, James Baldwin, Un autre pays.
Which is actually set in almost exactly the same part of New York as my book, at the end of the 50s, the beginning of the 60s, that earlier time. And all these books, I thought, did exactly this, that they looked at the exact moment in which the book is being written, and they managed to capture it for all time. And I just thought, okay, that's enough reassurance, now I can try and do it too. Peut-être.
Dans le livre, René discute avec son père et ils débattent du documentaire, de la non-fiction et René revendique vraiment de pratiquer la fiction. Il dit je laisse ce genre noble qu'est le documentaire à d'autres, moi je veux vraiment raconter des histoires. On sait qu'aujourd'hui, en tout cas en France, la non-fiction a aussi beaucoup de place. Ces dernières années, il y a eu aussi beaucoup de dystopies. Est-ce que pour vous, ça veut dire quelque chose de notre façon de voir le monde, ce genre de tendance éditoriale?
Well, it's true that right now, both those things, non-fiction and its cousin, autofiction, they're popular, and so is dystopia. It's a moment, you know. I mean, literature has fashions like everything else. I mean, I remember like when in the late 70s, early 80s, when I was starting out to write, the public's desire was for a much more experimental, unusual, non-realistic kind of fiction. And you know, many writers of that time in a way benefited from that interest of readers in reading something more adventurous. You know, so this is the moment of the great Latin American boom. This is the moment in American literature of very adventurous writers. Now there's a kind of change in the weather. And people like, you know, either non-fiction or fiction that looks like non-fiction. So, you know, the two greatest literary successes of the last decade are probably Karl Ove Knausgaard and Elena Ferrante. They're great writers, you know. But I'm just saying that this is what currently people like. But, you know, the wheel goes round. I mean, this novel is not autofiction. But it is also not magic realism. It's broadly speaking a realistic novel.
Alors, il y a aussi un passage qui parle quand même, qui redit un peu cet amour de l'imagination qu'a René. C'est quand il explique qu'il aime beaucoup la première phrase de Moby Dick, appelez-moi Ismaël. Et je trouvais ça très beau de rappeler cette première phrase parce que ça dit aussi que le lecteur est toujours appelé à participer aux histoires que l'auteur propose. Si on décide que non, vous vous appelez pas Ismaël, l'histoire se termine là. Est-ce que c'est une phrase que vous aimez aussi?
Yeah, I like it because it's a very mysterious phrase.
J'aime beaucoup parce que c'est une phrase très mystérieuse.
He does not say, my name is Ishmael.
Il ne dit pas, je m'appelle Ishmael.
He says, call me Ishmael.
Il a dit, appelle-moi Ishmael.
His name could be anything.
Son nom pourrait être n'importe quoi.
So even in the first sentence, there's an act of disguise.
Donc même dans la première phrase, il y a un acte de déguisement.
And Ishmael, he remains a kind of mystery all the way through the book. Everybody else in the book is quite clear. You know,
les autres caractères dans le livre sont très clairs.
I mean, Ahab has his obsession with the whale, you know, and all the other sailors on the boat, they're not complicated characters. They're pretty clear.
Et toutes les autres équipes du bateau, ils n'ont pas de problème, ils sont assez clairs.
Ishmael keeps himself to himself.
Ishmael, il se garde à lui-même.
And he's the only one who lives.
Et c'est le seul qui survit.
So you have to decide what you think about that.
Pensez ce que vous allez penser de ça.
Alors, je voulais aussi faire un petit peu le lien avec l'exil, puisque voilà, cette famille arrive d'Inde, et on voit bien quand Néron arrive, que c'est une histoire qui arrive. que finalement chaque migrant, chaque exilé a une valise d'histoire avec lui et il décide soit de l'ouvrir, soit de laisser cette valise fermée. Et vous citez Primo Levi qui dit « C'est là le résultat le plus immédiat de l'exil, du déracinement, la prédominance de l'irréel sur le réel. »
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it. Here, Nero arrives as the story he has decided to be.
Néron arrive comme l'histoire qu'il a voulu être.
But I like what you said about the suitcase of stories, you know.
J'aime ce que vous avez dit par rapport aux valises d'histoire.
Because I think something interesting is happening in American literature just now.
Parce qu'il y a quelque chose d'intéressant qui se passe dans la littérature américaine actuellement.
Especially amongst writers of a much younger generation than mine.
Surtout parmi les écrivains qui sont d'une génération plus jeune que moi.
There's a kind of new sort of American immigrant literature.
Une sorte de nouvelle style d'écrire d'immigrants américains.
I mean, historically, American literature was very affected by Italian immigration and by Eastern European Jewish immigration. Now, there are writers from literally everywhere in the world. You know, there are writers from China, from Vietnam, from the Caribbean, from South Asia, but they all think of themselves as American writers.
Ils se pensent tous comme des écrivains américains.
But they have these suitcases, you know, full of stories from elsewhere.
Plein des histoires de ailleurs.
And you know, they unpack the suitcases, and those stories from elsewhere become a part of the story of American literature. And I think it's very enriching for the literature.
Et je trouve que c'est très enrichissant pour la littérature.
So I'm reading these books of these much younger writers, and I think I can do that.
Donc je lis les livres de ces plus jeunes écrivains et je me dis, je peux faire ça.
You know, I've got a suitcase too. And maybe it's bigger than your suitcase. And maybe if I open the suitcase and see what flies out, maybe that's worth doing. So I think it's interesting to be inspired in a way by writers much younger than yourself. You know, it doesn't happen that often. You know? I mean, there are examples of it. For example, I don't know how many of you have read, there's a wonderful collection of the letters between Georges Sand and Gustave Flaubert. And at this point, Georges Sand is the most famous writer in France. And Flaubert is the new kid on the block. But if you read the letters, Georges Sand writes to Flaubert with incredible respect, as if she is the junior writer and he is the senior writer. You know, and he replies the same way. He replies as if he is the genius, you know, and she's somebody else. And it's really, really interesting how Georges Sand understood from the beginning that Flaubert was somebody special. Georges Sand avait compris que Flaubert était quelqu'un spécial. Okay. I just do this in French.
Merci beaucoup. Merci à vous.